It was meant to be just another peaceful Mediterranean cruise. The Achille Lauro, a magnificent 23,000-ton Italian luxury liner, had embarked from Genoa for what should have been a relaxing 12-day journey across sparkling waters. After stops in Naples and Syracuse, the ship docked at Alexandria, Egypt on Monday, October 8, 1985. None of the passengers could have imagined they were about to become part of one of the most dramatic hijacking crises in maritime history. That morning in Alexandria started routinely enough. Hundreds of passengers eagerly disembarked, boarding buses for a 2.5-hour journey to see the ancient pyramids of Cairo. This exodus left only about 70 passengers aboard, along with the ship's 340 crew members. As the Achille Lauro pulled away from port, heading east toward Port Said, where they planned to reunite with the touring passengers in 14 hours, the day seemed perfectly ordinary. The first sign of trouble came at 1 p.m. when a distress call from the ship crackled across radio waves, picked up by a station in far-off Gothenburg, Sweden. 4 armed men had seized control of the vessel, cornering terrified passengers in the dining room as shots rang out overhead. These hijackers had maintained a low profile throughout the voyage, their only interaction being a brief exchange with a hostess who asked their nationality. Their terse response, Norwegian, would soon be exposed as a lie. The situation quickly escalated into an international crisis. The United States initially dismissed it as just another terrorist incident, but when word reached Washington that American passengers were aboard, they switched into crisis mode. Meanwhile, the hijackers had forced Captain Gerardo de Rosa to the bridge, bombarding him with demands in Arabic, before ordering him in broken English to sail for the Syrian port of Tartus. The true identity of the hijackers emerged when they contacted Port Said officials. They were members of the Palestinian Liberation Front, PLF, a militant faction of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO. Their demands were clear: the release of 50 Palestinians from Israeli prisons. This revelation transformed a simple hijacking into a complex diplomatic crisis involving multiple nations. Italy's response was cautious. Prime Minister Bettino Craxi, mindful of his country's delicate relationships with Mediterranean Arab states, sought a peaceful resolution. This diplomatic tightrope walk was made even more precarious by recent events. Just a week earlier, Israeli forces had bombed the PLO's Tunis headquarters in retaliation for murders in Cyprus, killing 60 and wounding 100. While Italy mobilized elite military units to Cyprus as a precaution, they preferred negotiation to force. The Americans took a harder line. With a zero-tolerance policy toward terrorism, they deployed their legendary SEAL Team 6 to Sicily, planning a potential rescue operation. But events aboard the ship would soon make the situation far more grave. On Tuesday morning, the hijackers began separating passengers by nationality, identifying Americans, British, and Jewish travelers as valuable hostages. Among them was Leon Klinghoffer, a 69-year-old Jewish American confined to a wheelchair. When the hijackers ordered hostages to move to the pool deck, Klinghoffer's wife desperately pleaded to stay with him, but they forced her to leave. It would be the last time she would see her husband alive. By 11 a.m., the ship had reached the Syrian coast. The hijackers demanded permission to dock at Tartus, threatening to start executing hostages at 3 p.m. if their demands weren't met. Syria's refusal to let them dock, likely due to American diplomatic pressure, sealed Klinghoffer's fate. At around 3 p.m., the lead hijacker, Magid al-Molki, took Klinghoffer to the stern of the ship and shot him twice, once in the chest and once in the face. They then forced crew members to throw his body overboard. His remains would wash up on a Syrian beach 5 days later. The plot thickened when the hijackers received radio communication from someone using the pseudonym Abu Khaled, who ordered them to return to Port Said. Unknown to most at the time, Abu Khaled was actually Mohammed Abbas, a high-ranking PLO member and the mastermind behind the entire operation. In a twist of dark irony, Abbas had been detained in Cairo and pressed into service as a mediator for the crisis he himself had orchestrated. The following day brought a rapid series of events. The ship entered Egyptian waters despite American protests, and negotiations began. By 1:30 p.m., Captain de Rosa announced that everyone was in good health, a statement made at gunpoint concealing Klinghoffer's murder. Based on this assurance, the hijackers were allowed to disembark and disappear into Egypt. But the crisis wasn't over. U.S. intelligence soon discovered the hijackers were preparing to flee via an Egypt air flight. What followed was a remarkable display of American military might. 14 fighters from the USS Saratoga intercepted the Boeing 737, carrying the terrorists, forcing it to land at Sicily's Sigonella NATO base. There, an extraordinary standoff developed between American and Italian forces. Both allies now found themselves at odds over jurisdiction of the terrorists. The confrontation at Sigonella was intense. Some 80 American commandos, including members of SEAL Team 6, faced off against 300 Italian troops and police. For nearly 5 hours, both sides maintained their positions, until the White House finally ordered U.S. forces to stand down, accepting Italian jurisdiction over the terrorists. Justice would prove complicated. The shooter, Magidul Moltke, received a 30-year sentence, while his accomplices got 15 to 25 years. Abbas, the mastermind, initially escaped prosecution due to what Italy claimed was lack of evidence. Though later convicted in absentia, he would never face punishment, finding refuge in Iraq. The hijackers maintained they never intended to seize the ship, claiming they planned to use it only as transport for an attack on the Israeli port of Ashdod. This explanation was met with skepticism by both Italian courts and intelligence analysts. The Achille Lauro hijacking stands as a stark reminder of how quickly a peaceful voyage can turn tragic, and how international terrorism can transform a luxury cruise ship into the stage for a global crisis. It highlighted this complex web of Middle Eastern politics, the challenges of international cooperation in fighting terrorism, and the human cost of political violence. Most importantly, it showed how the actions of a few armed men could force nations to confront difficult questions about justice, sovereignty, and the price of peace.